Wars are often remembered by the names of nations that fought them. But some of the most devastating conflicts in human history were never officially declared, never fought directly between great powers, and never ended cleanly. These were proxy wars. Conflicts where empires pulled the strings from the shadows, supplied the weapons, chose the leaders, and let others do the dying. If you want to understand how global power truly works, you have to understand proxy war, because proxy war is not an exception to modern history. It is the rule. A proxy war is not fought because two neighboring nations hate each other. It is fought because distant powers see strategic value in someone else's land, someone else's people, and someone else's blood. Instead of sending their own armies and risking direct confrontation, powerful states fund, arm, train, and manipulate local forces. On the surface, these conflicts appear local, ethnic, religious, or ideological. Beneath the surface, they are global. Proxy warfare did not begin in the Cold War, but the Cold War perfected it. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers with weapons capable of destroying the planet. Direct war between them meant mutual annihilation, so they fought indirectly. Wherever a weak state existed, wherever a colony was collapsing, wherever political instability created opportunity, a proxy war followed. Korea was one of the first major proxy wars of the modern era. After Japan's defeat in 1945, Korea was divided along the 38th parallel. The North was backed by the Soviet Union and later China. The South was backed by the United States and its allies. What began as a civil conflict quickly became an international battlefield. Millions entire cities were flattened. And yet, technically, the United States and the Soviet Union were never at war with each other. Korea ended in stalemate, frozen borders, and a legacy of division that still exists today. Vietnam followed the same pattern, but on an even larger scale. To the Vietnamese, it was a war for independence, first against France, and then against foreign interference. To Washington and Moscow, it was a test of ideology. The United States feared the spread of communism. The Soviet Union and China saw an opportunity to weaken Western influence in Asia. The result was decades of violence. More bombs were dropped on Vietnam than in all of World War II combined. Millions of civilians died. And when the war ended, the superpowers moved on. Vietnam remained to rebuild from the ruins. Proxy wars thrive where power vacuums exist. Africa became one of the primary battlegrounds during decolonization. As European empires collapsed, newly independent states struggled with weak institutions and internal divisions. External powers exploited this. In Angola, a civil war erupted that lasted nearly 3 decades. The United States and South Africa backed one faction. The Soviet Union and Cuba backed another. Tens of thousands of Cuban soldiers fought and died thousands of miles from home. Not for Angola's future, but for Cold War strategy. Into Congo, foreign intelligence agencies manipulated leaders, funded coups, and fueled chaos to control resources. The assassination of Patrice Lumumba was not just a local tragedy. It was a warning. Independent leadership that threatened global interests would not be tolerated. Proxy war does not always look like open battle. Sometimes it looks like destabilization, assassinations, economic warfare, and endless internal conflict. The Middle East became another central arena. After the creation of Israel, regional tensions combined with Cold War rivalries. Arab states received Soviet backing. Israel aligned with the West. Wars in 1948, 1967, and 1973 all carried proxy dimensions, but the most enduring proxy conflicts emerged later. Lebanon's civil war turned the country into a battlefield for regional and global powers. Militias rose and fell, each backed by external sponsors. Civilians paid the price. Afghanistan represents one of the clearest examples of proxy war consequences. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, the United States saw an opportunity. Rather than confronting Soviet forces directly, it funded and armed Afghan fighters through regional allies. Billions of dollars in weapons flowed into the country. The Soviet Union eventually withdrew, defeated and exhausted. But the war did not end. Afghanistan was left flooded with weapons, fractured factions, and radicalized fighters. The aftershocks of that proxy war would shape global terrorism for decades. Proxy wars did not end with the Cold War. They simply evolved. In the 21st century, they became more complex, more fragmented, and harder to identify. Syria is a modern example. What began as protests turned into a brutal civil war. Regional powers backed different factions. Global powers intervened indirectly. Weapons, money, and fighters poured in. Syria became a battlefield not just for Syrians, but for global influence. Millions were displaced. Cities were destroyed, and once again, those who fueled the conflict bore little of the cost. Yemen tells a similar story. A local power struggle escalated into a proxy war involving regional rivals. Airstrikes, blockades, and armed militias plunged the country into humanitarian catastrophe. Children starved. Infrastructure collapsed, and yet the war continued, sustained by external funding and strategic calculations. Proxy war works because it provides plausible deniability. Leaders can claim they are not at war. Casualties do not appear on their own streets. Political risk is minimized, but the moral cost is immense. Proxy wars prolong conflict, radicalize populations, and destroy the possibility of stable peace. They turn nations into battlefields and generations into victims. Technology has changed proxy warfare, but not its logic. Drones, cyber operations, mercenary groups, and private military contractors allow states to project power without official involvement. Information warfare manipulates populations without firing a shot. Social media becomes a battlefield. Proxy war is no longer limited to guns and bombs. It now includes narratives, economies, and identities. What makes proxy war especially dangerous is how invisible it can be. Civilians are told their conflict is ancient, inevitable, rooted in old hatreds. Rarely are they shown the external interests that benefit from continued instability. Proxy war depends on division. It thrives on polarization. Peace is bad for business when influence is at stake. History shows a pattern. Proxy wars rarely produce clear winners. They produce broken states, traumatized societies, and unresolved grievances. The powers that intervene often move on to the next crisis. The people left behind inherit the consequences. Understanding proxy war forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about global power. It reveals that morality is often secondary to strategy, that sovereignty is fragile, that the most powerful weapons are not always used directly, and that the greatest victims of a global rivalry are almost never the ones who start it. Proxy war is not just a historical concept. It is happening now, and it will continue as long as power is unequal and accountability is distant. The question is not whether proxy wars will exist, but whether societies will recognize them early enough to resist becoming the battlefield. If this documentary helped you see history and modern conflicts more clearly, support the Royal Era by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with others who want to understand how power truly works.